you still have the human, and the human's expensive. And now you've added technology from people like me that are selling it to somebody and, need to justify that venture capital we brought in and so forth. So now we just raised the cost of doing this, right? AI is supposed to be less costly, but now we've just added something to it.
Welcome to the Measure Success podcast, where we feature top leaders on how they measure success in their business and life. Now, let's learn from their experiences.
J Cox here, host of the Measure Success podcast, where I talk with top leaders about effective strategies that inspire success. We're very excited today to have Derek Streat. He is a health tech entrepreneur and advocate for data transparency who's focused on delivering exceptional access to care for everyone. He's the co-founder and CEO for DexCare. Derek, welcome to the Measure Success podcast.
Thanks for having me, Carl. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. So you are just north of us here in the Seattle area. We're down here in the Portland area. We were just talking about, and prior to this recording, I was just up in the same area, and great to have you on. One of the things we were talking about pre-show is just how much medical is changing, and everyone is impacted, right? At the end of the day, somebody they know is experiencing healthcare issues, or they're personally experiencing healthcare issues. I personally, when I have to go to a doctor now, it's 3 to 6 to 9 months. It's way further. And technology is having a significant difference and impact on this. So, Derek, you're an expert in this, much more than I am. Tell us how the changes in healthcare is going to be impacting what doctors are experiencing from one perspective, and then how patients are experiencing it.
You're right, Carl. So healthcare impacts all of us, and I've been in this space in one form or the other for at least for my professional life for the last 15 years or so, building companies at the intersection of kind of data transparency and healthcare. And then I do that in my nonprofit work as well. And so I can really kind of just speak to it from that aspect of it. There's so much that healthcare encompasses. And today we're very much focused on access, which just means, can you get care in the first place? Not kind of creating new therapies or things like that. And from an access standpoint, it's really hard to access care. And I do data-driven intelligence companies, but I don't need to give you a bunch of data to tell you that. I'm sure you and we all have had an experience where either for ourselves or our loved ones, we've had to get care, and we either end up, if it's emergent, we're waiting in an emergency room for a long time, which is no fun. Or if it's not emergent, we're waiting a long time to get an appointment to see a primary care doc. And if it's something specialized, then we're waiting a long time to get the primary care doc, who then gets us a referral to get to the other person. Then we call the call center, and then they tell us they'll see us in 8 months. And so that kind of expansion of how difficult it is to get access is something that has been, unfortunately accelerating. And that's because there are more providers that are leaving the profession than we're adding every year. And there's a bunch of things that are driving that, with tightening of kind of medical graduation programs and things like that. So there's some potential solutions there, but it's typically not enough. And at the same time, you've got these major demographic shifts. There's 11,000 people every day that are aging into Medicare in this country. And we're all paying, that's the largest insurance program in the country. We all pay for that program as taxpayers. And I personally believe that's a good thing. I think we should do more. And we're going to have to do more, because 11,000 people aging in that program every day, it's just getting more and more expensive. So there's more demand and less supply. And we don't need to be economists to know what happens there. The good news is there are technology solutions that are helping address that burden. The company I'm part of, DexCare, is one part of the solution, where we generate data that health systems have. We work with hospital systems and the providers there. We generate data to understand who can take care of people the most efficiently, and then we match and route patients to those providers and systems in a way that kind of creates capacity or balances load across the system. So, that's chipping away at it, but there's no silver bullet to this problem, Carl. It's because there's a fundamental supply demand imbalance. This creates, challenges that we all need to work through. And some of those solutions, talking about just before starting this, some of those solutions create, additional issues, right? So, like, what are the ethics and what are the societal willingness, right, to have the first level of access and even maybe the second level of access taken care of by a generative AI chatbot, right, instead of a human. The science will tell you that at a certain level of acuity, those kind of technologies can do pretty well. Just like the science will tell you that a self-driving car will do better than humans driving it. And we're all fine with that until we're the person in the self-driving car that crashes that one time. And then the science kind of goes out the window. And I'm not putting out an opinion on right or wrong here. I'm just saying, as a society, we have challenges dealing with, particularly in a hyper political environment we're in. We have challenges dealing with what's coming at us right now, which is supply demand imbalances. Technology is and data is a solution to help with it, but we have a problem as a society dealing with those kinds of things. So it's interesting. We can talk more about that if you want. So
yeah, no, I'm actually totally fascinated by this because, and once again, this impacts all of us, right? These are the type of issues that's so relevant, and the show is called the Measure Success Podcast, and how you measure success in so many different things, and we have a legitimate question of how we're going to measure success in medicine. And you hit on something that I loved. There are facts today that tell us, like you said, it's safer to be in an autonomous vehicle driving. But if you're in that autonomous vehicle that drove, that's an accident, it's 100% not safe, right? That's your experience. And then, of course, that becomes the headline. And so our emotions take over, despite the facts that it is actually overall safer. A autonomous vehicle is never going to be drinking and driving. An autonomous vehicle is never going to be stoned while driving, right? I mean, they're not going to be reading on their phone while driving. I mean, there's just some facts that are true that despite our feelings, right, they're less likely to be distracted. Now let's go into healthcare, right? It's more likely than not that a software program is going to be able to detect something in terms of, let's say, a cancer, right, from a radiologist perspective than a human can. So let's go down that path a little bit, right? Because there's just once again, there's this emotion and there's these facts. And what is it going to take for our emotion to catch up with the facts that we have to change the way how we're doing things?
Like many things in life, again, not a lot of silver bullets or shortcuts or whatever analogy you want to use. I think probably the biggest thing, Carl, is it takes time, right? I mean, I'm old enough to, remember the time when, I drove around the car with my grandparents and parents, and there were no seatbelts, in the car, and and then there was a time where they added them, and a time where they made them mandatory. And I'm again old enough to remember, my father just sort of putting the seatbelt around his arm without clicking it in, going through the work and the motion, but he was going to show them that he didn't have to do that. And then of course, time eventually, people sort of start getting more reasonable about things. And so I think that's one of the things when it becomes part of the fabric of how you're taken care of in healthcare, people start to accept it more. And the radiology, I'm glad you mentioned that. The radiology or kind of visual AI side of the equation is something that actually, there's a lot of hype right now around Gen AI, and we can type in prompts into something and the system talks back to us in ways that we understand. And that gets us all very excited. But things like visual AI, I built a company in the surgery space that we sold to Johnson & Johnson. That was 10 years ago, where we were training machines to interpret what a surgeon was doing in a intraoperative field, and like radiology scans, things like that. These are solved problems. And so the good news is that if you go get a scan done today, what is most likely happening is the radiologist is the scan's getting done. The AI is evaluating that image and coming up with a prediction as to what's happening. But then, this is important to your question, then it's going to a radiologist who is then saying, all right, I agree with it. Or if not, they can change course. They're the pilot sitting in the cockpit of the autopilot who is letting the plane fly itself for the most part, but they've got the contextual awareness of all the other things going on in history and things like that, because a lot of those data sources are not stitched together in that AI to ultimately make the call on that. And I think that's what ultimately, this is where, most of these, I'm in a lot of these AI discussions these days in healthcare and various panels and stuff. And that's where they tend to go, right? Like you put a human there as the safety mechanism that gets people comfortable, and then we move forward. And over time, then people kind of move forward with it. And back to like the car analogy, I was just chatting with a CIO of a very large health system that's one of our partners at DexCare the other day at dinner, and he's in a Tesla Pilot for fully autonomous long-term driving, and he's like, I use this thing, and it drives me back from the airport, and I can read and do this and that, and the reason I'm comfortable is because I can take over at any time. And he doesn't take over at any time, but he can do it, and it's really fast, and the steering wheel's right there, and that gives comfort. So I think that will happen here as well. The one thing I'll mention is, there's nothing free, though, is the problem. And so if you just think about that logically, we may talk about this a bit, but because there's a supply and demand imbalance in healthcare, if you kind of follow what I just said, what happens is you still have the human, and the human's expensive. And now you've added technology from people like me that are selling it to somebody, and need to justify that venture capital we brought in and so forth. So now we just raised the cost of doing this, right? AI is supposed to be less costly, but now we've just added something to it, right? And so we got to work through that as well, because that's not going to be sustainable long term either.
I will not name the doctor who was forward-looking and explaining some of the things that he was helping me understand. And I want to be careful once again who's listening. I'm not an expert in medical, but I do work with medical organizations and help them facilitate their strategic plans, to get to growth. But pulling back for a moment, he was saying, there's an interesting problem right now that's happening, is that the cost, right? It's cheaper to have somebody who is not a doctor, to do the analysis. But what happens is those who are not doctors, because they're less experienced, are more likely to order more tests, more software, so to speak, right? Because they're less confident. And so the overall cost ends up being more, just like what you said, that you didn't say it in that same way, right? But that because of literally the lack of confidence or the lack of experience in the person who's ordering it in the first place, where they might discern up front, no, this is not your problem based on all the symptoms you're saying. Right. So they're going to have the confidence to just go one direction or another. But if you lack, and then we could call this good or bad, right? Hospitals are going to make more money by more tests, right? Because they get to bill out those tests that are happening. So you have a weird economic thing, right? Of like, yes, it's going to help out one thing, but is it reducing the overall cost that we have to deal with as a society? And it's just a question. There's an open question. I have not validated what he said there, but it was an interesting question he was raising.
Yeah, it's probably, this is more of a meta comment. It's, I think it applies well beyond healthcare, but I think, just part of, I don't know, maybe it's the curse of just being human, is that we rarely solve a problem without creating another one. Like it's like, and maybe, I come from the Midwest originally, so I'm just definitely like, it's in my DNA that, there's no free lunch, right? There's always something else. And I think in this case, what happens is, so what you're referring to is what's called in the field, it's called top of license. And it's a good thing. And it means, I get licensed to be a medical practitioner, and, not everybody needs to be a, super sophisticated, cardiothoracic robotic surgeon. Thankfully, right, there are folks that want to be primary care docs and want to be nurses and want to be medical assistants and so forth. And so this is the good part of the technology that we're talking about is it allows more and more people to operate at the top of their license, or maybe another way to think of it is it extends the top of their license. So now, what a medical assistant or a nurse can do today is orders of magnitude more than what they could have done even 10 years ago. And that's because the technology helps assist in that process. And when you think of it from a cost standpoint, and we do a lot of this work at DexCare, as a matter of fact, if a doctor costs this much and a nurse costs this much, but now this nurse with technology can operate at this level, and the cost of the technology is maybe here, right, and just gets it to there. Now that lowers the cost, right for us all. There's no free lunch. It kind of, typically, again, in any field, the challenges with AI that we're all wrestling with right now are more ethical challenges. And what do you do? I mean, what that's going to do, right, is that's going to lower now essentially the wages of everybody in the space now, right? And maybe it won't obsolesce, somebody like it would on a manufacturing line that is, that a floor that's now made robotically controlled, but it's going to put pressure, right? And so if there's less reimbursement, now people are getting paid less, right? That's gonna break, or it's just gonna take time for us to deal with that as society and figure out how we get through it. But yeah, the issues in healthcare, particularly when it comes to the intersection of workforce, or kind of supply and resources, and demand, and the impacts of technology are very similar to what's happening in every other space. And that we got to wrestle through work through the same things. What happens on what happens in there'll be less instances, but there'll be instances nonetheless that when the technology goes wrong, what happens to the workforce is that now there's downward pressure on their wages and certain components of their jobs, if not their entire jobs, are obsolete. I mean, this is happening everywhere, and we've got to figure this out as a society.
No, I think and I'll call it, and once again, forgive me for not looking up your age ahead of time, and that was not the goal here, but this Generation X, so to speak, right? You get the baby boomers who are retiring at a massive rate, and great for pickleball, right? That industry is booming, but this Generation X in between has a real interesting pickle, right? Because there's very few of us relative to the other generation, right? That's behind us as well. But we have the most experience, right? And who's left, right? Who's left and active and wanting. So I think, interestingly enough, I think our generation has an opportunity to do extraordinary things. And we're going to be busier as all be trying to solve it. I'm not sure how much credit we're going to get for it, frankly, because there's not enough of us to toot our own horn.
Right.
But there's just this interesting dynamic to the generation behind us, I think, is going to be much more apt to welcome the technology, right? Because they've been living with it forever, right? Versus you went back to you and I remember those days too. I remember being in the back. Remember those the station wagons that had the seats in the back, and then of course
facing the other way. Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yes. It just, once again, we lived with. I mean, my dad, rest in peace. I remember when he had a PBR in his car. That was open container. I mean, like, these were just things that were like. Okay, and unfortunately, we've recognized it's probably not the best idea, to do this thing anymore. But things have changed, and it'll be interesting to see as we grapple and get through that. Curious, and maybe you could talk about from a DexCare perspective, or maybe just what you're trying to do overall. When you take a look at these big issues that are happening, how are you going to measure success in it?
So at so I can start with DexCare, then I'll kind of pull up a bit. So at DexCare, we're a data-driven intelligence company focused 100% on making access better and easier for everyone. And that's patients like you and me, and providers, and the health system. So our fundamental thesis, and we're proving it out with 3 million patients a year that are going through this platform. Our fundamental thesis is that care becomes more accessible when you figure out the underlying data and needs and what's really going on across all three stakeholders, so you can balance them out, right? So if you're a health system, and again, health systems, hospitals, clinics, et cetera, and you're optimizing for your consumer or your patient experience, that's great. Could be great for the consumer or patient experience until you burn out all your providers, and then they can't provide good care. And in the grand scheme of things, the quality of the lobby of the health system is far less important than did they fix my thing that I got to deal with here. If I optimize for the providers, which a lot of systems do, unfortunately, then it becomes very difficult to schedule something online, or I got to wait a long time to do it, or whatever. And then if I optimize for the health system, well, now it's optimizing for a business and profit, and that's got an issue there as well, obviously. And so we believe you got to really balance these things out. And we found that when you do that, you can see a lot more people, and you can expand capacity in the health system, and you can not burn out as many people, and to boot, you can actually make more money as a health system doing that. Like, you can win on all fronts here, and that's because there's inefficiencies in the health system, and things are not optimized often. And so what I think it's going to take is, at least in the healthcare sense, is we already talked about time and just kind of macro things that just need to happen to get us comfortable with these kinds of things, which it will. I also think it's going to take, we really believe as a DexCare, like, it's going to take an appreciation for healthcare to work. This is a multi-stakeholder world, and you've got to, and it's far more complicated than I think people even realize, because they tend to over-index on one particular group. If I'm a provider, I'm very focused on all the hours I'm working, all the extra, work I got to do in the EMR that takes away from me practicing medicine. My reimbursement's going down. I'm very, just as humans, like we get very kind of myopically focused. And so, it's going to take an appreciation for the needs of everybody and balancing it all. The same thing is true of the health system, by the way. I mean, we spun out a Providence Health System, which is a $30 billion nonprofit health system here on the West Coast, Catholic health system. Rod Hochman, the CEO there, who initiated this project, is fond of saying, look, there's no mission without the margin. I mean, it's a faith-based organization that needs to generate cash, not as profit, because it's a nonprofit, all goes back into the care. But if that doesn't happen, it doesn't exist. And that organization provides a ton of care to people in 7 states in this country. And so you've got to balance everybody's needs. Now that requires understanding the underlying data, that requires that systems, that's a little bit of just and people getting along. That's a lot of change management in the system. I mean, and what I've learned in healthcare over the last 15 years, because I did technology companies out of healthcare prior to that, is that it's rarely a technology problem. That's such a small piece of the solution. It's almost always the big piece of it is change management and working through complex organizations with really smart people in them that are trying to address these multifactorial problems. This is why in the healthcare space, if you go to C-level conferences in this space, the people that are often keynotes and talking are and kind of helping guide these are often not healthcare people. They're people that have been involved in complex leadership organizations. And so as an example, we had at one of our events a couple of years ago, General Stanley McChrystal, who ran JSOC, all the joint operations battling Al-Qaeda right after the Iraq War. And the reason, and he's got a whole group that consults with and works with these kind of organizations now. And the reason is because when he got involved in that, he totally transformed how the military command operated there, because he had to, because the enemy was distributed in their actions and knowledge, and central command no longer worked. So we had to change everything entirely. That wasn't a technology problem. I mean, they have plenty of technology and so forth there. It was a change management problem at the highest level in a massive, complex organization that had never operated that way before. And may not be the answer you want to hear, because these are super hard things to deal with, but healthcare is a really complicated thing. And I'm not even talking about the complications of disease management and things like that. One of our board members is Toby Cosgrove, who was CEO of Cleveland Clinic, literally the number 2 hospital in the entire world when he was running it. And when he first joined our board, I'm just, what he said, it'll always stick with me. He said, solving healthcare is not about like creating new therapies or drugs or devices. Like, we have all this stuff. Like, we know how to do that. He said it's getting an appointment and paying for an appointment. If you could just like do those 2 things, you will make huge impact in it, which is why we focus on access. But it just shows you that, if the number 2 hospital in the entire world can't solve that problem or hasn't solved that problem, like, these are very, very complicated. And at the end of the day, what I've learned just in my life is that, data and science and the kinds of things that I do for building companies takes you so far. And then you eventually get to a point where it's a little bit more art than science, which is weird for me to say because I'm a technologist at the end of the day. But things like change management, human relationships, complex organizations, and refactoring how they're organized and operate. I mean, these are really hard long-term things to do, but it is what, unfortunately, in healthcare, there's not an easy fix. It's what it's going to take to get this done.
This is going to be a tough question, maybe unfair, but I'm going to ask it anyways. Because we're talking about massive change, right? That's taking place. And there's millions of strategies. There's no lack of technology, and there's no lack of intelligent people to help solve it. But what is the one thing, if you may, when you've seen successful transformation take place, what is that one thing that you think is a consistent theme or strategy that helps it actually work and get to its final destination?
Yeah, so I'll do it from the perspective of, I'm an entrepreneur. I've started my career as an investment banker, but I got the bug pretty early and have been building companies for the last 25 years. And DexCare is the 6th institutionally venture-backed company that I've done. And what I've learned, and some of them have gotten to scale, some of them have not, but what I've learned is that, it's real. If I had to pick one thing, it's hard, like I said, but if I had to pick one thing, it really comes down to shared purpose. If people have shared purpose, smart people will figure out how to get things done. Like I tell the team here, so back up a little bit. So I've always been of the mind that, there's always these camps in the entrepreneur world of, like, roughly speaking, the bootstrapping camp or the outside capital camp. There's gradations, obviously, but for purposes of discussion, I've always been in the outside capital camp, not because I started as an investment banker, but because I really believe that, like, if you get smart people together and you organize them around shared purpose, it's all about runway. Like, if you look at the most successful companies you can think of, there is a time where people wrote them off. I remember when I was a banker, we did not get on the S1. We tried to, but it was too competitive when Jeff took Amazon public, and we were cozy with his board members and so forth. And there was a time where they, like, I don't know if people remember, but right after they went public, like, the stock was down. People were like, e-commerce thing. This is not going to take off, right? And if you look at how he ran that company when he was running it, the reason it took a while for the street to ultimately understand what he was doing was because he perpetually lost money for years and years and years.
Oh, yeah.
And eventually, when the street realized it wasn't a fluke, like, his goal, the way he was playing this, and this is kind of my point, was that if you get enough smart people in the room, you have shared purpose. In his case, it was all around customer centricity. Then you just need enough time and you'll figure it out. And the reason I subscribe to the outside capital philosophy is time is money, right? If you don't have money, you're going to run out of time. It's the whole runway analogy, right? And so you just need time. And if you put those two elements of smart people and shared purpose, and what I also find is if you have really good shared purpose and you have, like, money to pay people, well, like, you'll get smart people. So that, it's a pretty easy box to check. It's really that you're all climbing this mountain that you may not know how to do it. As a matter of fact, if you're early on and you say you know how to do it, you're probably already going down the wrong path. Like, you need to have this kind of mentality that, look, we are going to try a ton of stuff, rapid iteration testing, and eventually we're going to get that answer. And if you've got enough runway, like, it'll get figured out. How many times has Apple been on its deathbed, right? And
people forget.
In the world.
People forget, right?
Yeah, they create time. And so that's the key thing. Share purpose, I guess I would add, just creating time. And luckily the creating time part is a pretty easy solve, like, mathematically. I'm not saying it's easy to do, but mathematically, like, it directly correlates to money, right? It's not like this money is everything, but if you've got enough money, you have enough runway, you'll attract the right people and you'll figure it out. It's possible, by the way, you'll do that and eventually realize, well, we tried enough things. This actually is not a market, but I would submit, if you've got enough runway, you'll just find another market, right? You'll just find another pond to fish in. You'll just figure it out. And if you have good investors and so forth, then they'll be with you, on that ride as well.
Derek, I love that answer. Thank you for going through that. All right, so we're just going to have a very quick piece on the personal side. One of your stories is your daughter was having health issues, and that really probably transformed everything about your life when you ran into that. Maybe just kind of briefly talk about that story and how did that change the way you see the world based on going through that?
Yeah, so when my daughter was 1.5, she presented with a disease of still a sort of unknown etiology, but it ended up kind of inflaming various parts of her body. And unfortunately, one of the places that it inflamed were her kidneys. And if you inflame your kidneys, then they scar up and they don't work so well. And kidneys are there's a lot of important parts of the body. That's a pretty important one because, all the bad byproducts of what you eat and so forth got to get pushed out, and that's how it happens. So if they don't, they stay in your body, and so it can be a death sentence. And so unfortunately, it took out her kidneys at a very young age. Once we got kind of disease suppressed, then she had a kidney transplant when she was 3. 16 now, doing very well. If you saw her, you wouldn't know. She's a normal kid, doing all the things that that teenagers do. But it did, and we still manage it a lot because the current state of the technology is such that it does require constant vigilance, since you've got a foreign organ in the body there. But it shaped what I do and how I think about things in a lot of ways. So, like, very tactically speaking, it put me in the healthcare space. Before that, I was doing kind of ad tech, martech, and then I spent a couple years doing global development work, microcredit work, mostly in India and other parts of Southeast Asia. But once I was exposed to the healthcare situation, and we were fortunate enough, I had sold a company before then that my wife and I were just able to stop everything we were doing, focus 100% of on her care and get her stabilized. And so once you stabilize, then part of being an entrepreneur, I really believe, is like, to be successful, you have to suspend disbelief on things and believe that you can solve the problem. And then again, if you can get some capital, some runway, and shared purpose, that you've got a good shot at it. And so getting into healthcare, like a lot of technology entrepreneurs, I came in pretty wide-eyed and looked at a lot of dysfunction in the space and thought, this would be a no-brainer, right? We'll just throw some technology over here, right? Kind of back to where we started the conversation. We'll just get rid of that person over there and have an AI do that. Everybody will be fine with it. And it's 20% of the GDP, so there's plenty of money floating around this thing. All the mistakes that people make in this field. But I realized that there was a personal reason to solve it. And then what I also realized was that, or not solve it, but just, contribute to the solution, was that then it just sort of opened my aperture to just, and you and I are talking about this coming on this call, like, we're all dealing with this and going to deal with this. We're fragile as humans. There's a pretty hard ceiling on life expectancy. Yeah, there's people that are working on ways to extend that, but it's not like, we're going, people are extending it to 200, right? I mean, like finding another 5 years, right? Or whatever. It's
That's right. That's right. Nobody
Yeah.
recently has lived to 400, 500, 700 years.
Exactly, right. It's like, so it only goes so far. The other thing that, my company I did before DexCare was in the surgery space, and an AI company in the surgery space. And what I learned, I founded that with a robotic surgeon at the University of Washington here. And what I learned in that space is that, which was very eye-opening, was that the average person, all of us, are going to have on average 7 surgeries in our lifetime, which is pretty eye-opening, because that's about as invasive as you can get, and we're going to have 7 of them. And so you get older, and knees go, and hips go, and all sorts of stuff. And so it just really, for an entrepreneur, size of opportunity and both impact on number of lives, the fact you can personalize it to you and your family, there's a ton of money there's a ton of customers. I mean, all that stuff just screams, yeah, let's jump in, right? What you don't realize until you get in a while is that there's a reason it's elusive. I mean, it is incredibly challenging space, not only for the reason we've talked about so far on this call, but a whole bunch of other things we probably don't have time to get into around, dysfunctional models. And, it's the only industry where you're a doctor, Carl, you deliver value to me, and I say, thank you very much, you saved my life, and then I send the bill to somebody totally different. I mean, it doesn't even make sense. And so there's all these other challenges. And so it just there's definitely other easier places to be an entrepreneur and make money, but it's so impactful. I mean, at DexCare, when we started 7 years ago inside of Providence, we were serving a handful of patients. Last year, we served more patients across our network than we had the previous 6 years. This year, we're on track to double that again and serve more this year than we have all the years before that. And today, 20% of the US population can get access to a DexCare powered experience. So that makes it worth it for all the effort that goes into it. And then we've been fortunate that we've got really good investors that have put $200 million into this to provide the runway for us to make mistakes and figure out how to, keep making care more accessible.
That's a great story. So I'd like to ask the question today, based on everything that's happened now, how are you measuring success in your personal life?
Yeah. So, and I saw this earlier. So I thought about this. I think, for me, I don't know that I would. So my answer is, I don't know that I would normally think of it this way, but when I thought about this question, I wouldn't immediately think this way, but once I reflected, I think it's about I think success equates to happiness. So then the question becomes, well, what makes you happy? And what I found is that it ultimately is helping as many people as possible. There are different relationships we all have in life, and so family's top for me, and so helping them, not just my daughter, my whole family is top of the game. But then ultimately, you want to help as many people as possible. And being honest, I think part of, for better or worse, part of being an entrepreneur, it's kind of a selfish profession. I mean, it's certainly not the easiest way to make money or have the most stability in your family life. But I think part of the selfish side of it, maybe this is a good part of the selfish side of it, is that you want to, like you do, like one of the ways you keep score is how many people were impacted by what I did, right? Like how much influence did I have on the world that I'm trying to influence? And in the case of DexCare, it's nice because it's very literal. Like we have a system that allows you as an individual to get access to care, discover it in a way you wouldn't have otherwise seen it, and then get hooked up with the provider that can actually see you as opposed to making you wait forever, right? So it's very literal. And so I can look at 2.5 million people and say, hey, we did something important there. And that becomes addictive, right? Because it's not like you stop there, right? So we did 3 million visits, our visits for these 3 million people last year. And that's great. We'll do that this year. Sorry, that's great. But then I look at the fact there's 1.3 billion B instead of an M billion visits in the country, in the U.S. healthcare system every year. So we're like dropping the bucket, right? But back to like earlier, I suspect that the folks that are running Amazon now, Andy and that team over there, probably come back to the point that their current argument against the government that's kind of weighing on them for anti-competitive practices right now is that, look, we may be a big piece of online retail, but we're still a fraction of total retail out there, right? And so, I look at that and I say, geez, they're probably motivated by the same thing, right? They're probably saying, look, this is, yeah, we're making a bunch of money doing all this kind of stuff, but at the end of the day, like there's so much more retail that you could be influencing.
And there's so many small businesses that they help that rely upon their systems to help them to grow. It's an amazing thing that they've created. I'm not, once again, it's not all good, but there is a lot of good in it. And sometimes we miss the big picture, I think, and all that. All right. Time's running out here. One of your favorite books that you like to recommend to people?
The one I've enjoyed the most, I finished it a while back. It's been out for a while, but it's Sapiens by Yuval, forget his full name there. I'm sure you can find it up afterwards. But it's an account of just human history and why we are the way we are, and what motivates us. And there's some really interesting, I think, theories he shares in there around how our ability to believe in myths is what really separates us apart from every other species. And I guess that probably resonates with me back to this shared purpose idea, right? I mean, at the end of the day, a lot of these shared purposes, these are not like tangible things, right? You can't count that in a bank account. So it's in some ways it's a myth, and it's an idea. You've got to get people around it. But his view of the world is that's why we're at the top of the food chain, because whether it's religion or politics or whatever, we've got a lot of myths that a lot of people have bought into, and that motivates activity.
That's right. And the book is Sapiens: A Brief History of Humankind by probably mess this up, Yuval Noah Harari. And so anyways, yeah, great recommendation there. Derek, this has been absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for being a guest on the Measure Success podcast. How can people connect, learn about more what you're doing in DexCare?
Yeah, sure. We're online, DexCare.com, DexCare.com, just like it sounds. You can learn about what we do there. And then in our news section, there's our marketing team is very good at kind of spreading the word about what we're doing out there as well. I think helped arrange this as well. So appreciate the time and the opportunity here, Carl, and really enjoyed it as well.
Thank you. Yeah. And to everyone else who's listening, once again, we are so grateful we get incredible guests like Derek at a consistent basis who are literally changing the world and the impact they're making. I just loved it what you'd be able to share today. to everyone who's listening, go out there, rate the show, do comments, say, Derek, great job. That's what gets me excited to hear the impact that our guests are doing in the world. And that's what we're trying to help motivate you. If you're considering being an entrepreneur or growing your company or taking it to the next level, that's what these steps are about, is helping you not only in the business, but on the business as well. As well as like to say, wishing you the very best and measuring your success. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the Measure Success podcast. We'll see you again next time to learn from the best. Remember to subscribe now to get future episodes.